Greetings, Canadian political pod listener. I'm your narrator, Gary, an artificial intelligence-generated voice. Exciting and serious sounding is what we typed in the AI voiceover input field. And boom, Gary exists. Hey, do you know what's not artificial? Not even one bit? The highly influential audiences, air quotes media podcasts, offer to its advertisers. And I say that with all the sincerity a machine learning, data-optimized, predictive network of interconnected neural nodes can muster. Whether your ad message is on Curse of Politics, the hurly-burly, Hotel Pacifico, or the brand-new Race to Replace, you will be reaching cabinet ministers, members of parliament, the political class, the C-suite, and corporate Canada, leading journalists, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. People saying this is a unique political moment is underselling it. Policy is under scrutiny. A party leader is being voted on. The Ontario election is underway. There will be a new prime minister. And then there's the guy living in the White House who calls us the 51st state. Does anyone remember another time like this? I'm instantly scouring millions of data points to answer my own rhetorical question. No, you do not. This is when you need to get your message to the decision makers. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com. You'll be dealing with Jill and Todd, who are real, not artificial at all people, and generally very friendly. Well, Jill is anyway. We're still deciding about Todd.
You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Brother Geoff, good to see you.
Brother Mike, snowy morning here.
Yes,
where I am at least.
The snowmageddon has hit the West Coast. Our listeners outside of Vancouver must be very distressed about us and the hardships we're under here.
Yeah.
At least 2 inches of snow, I think.
Very, very serious. Very serious.
It was a snow day at school today for my daughter's school. They just couldn't hack it. Well, unfortunately for us, it's a snow day for Kate Hammer too. Actually, that's not her excuse. She had other things to do, but as a hardy Ontario-bred person like Kate is, 10 feet of snow wouldn't deter her from coming to the podcast. Unfortunately, she had some work to do today. So it's just the two Muppets in the balcony here, keeping everyone company. So later on, the Strategy Suite. It's been quite a week for news. Tariffs. They're on, they're off. For how long? Who knows? Premier Eby set up a war room. He's got Commander Kalon running a cabinet committee. He's got Brenda Bailey trying to figure out if there's what's going to go in that budget and how long it's going to be, how long the assumptions are going to make sense. And we've got John Rustad blaming David Eby for the whole thing. So lots to talk about in Strategy Suite. But our guest today on the front lines of the tariff crisis and how it impacts workers is Suzanne Skidmore, now in her second term as president of the BC Federation of Labour. She's one of the Labour members of Premier Eby's Tariff Advisory Council. Just last week, she chaired a 2-day meeting of the Federation's ranking officers that considered this issue along many others. A veteran activist and leader of the BC General Employees Union, Suzanne worked in the court system in Prince George, where she became a prominent Labour voice in northern BC before rising to Secretary-Treasurer of the Fed in 2018 under then-President Laird Cronk. She won election herself in 2022, and she's also committed New Democrat and member of the federal NDP's executive. Suzanne, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Thanks for having me.
Hope we got the details right there.
There's a lot of details. Bios are so weird.
Did it make it? Just checking on the work of my ghostwriter here.
I love it.
Well, yeah, shall we call you Sister Skidmore, or we'll just
Sure,
stick
yeah,
with Suzanne?
you sure can.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, great.
either or.
Okay,
Yeah, you can
brothers
call
and
me
sisters here. So the BC Fed's 500,000 members, or what's the latest count there of how many people you represent?
Yeah, we have about 500,000 workers through affiliated unions as part of the BC Federation of Labour. We're the umbrella organization for many of the unions in BC.
Well, how is union density going these days? What share of the workforce is unionized?
It's growing because of some of the legislative changes around making unions easier to join for working people. It was complicated and a bit hard for people, so we are seeing union density start to grow. It's in the sort of mid to high 20s, I think. Actually, I haven't checked it recently because we know there has been growth in union density with some big certifications, particularly QP and a couple of others where we've seen a lot of working folks come together to collectively join their unions and bargain together and deal with their employers that way. So we are seeing definitely an uptake in folks joining unions and wanting to be part of a union.
Mhm.
Is BC still one of the highest union densities in Canada and North
It
America?
is. Yeah, it is. Hmm.
And what explains that? Why are we different here? Is it just our kind of historic resource-based economy that had lots of unionization starting 100 years ago or so, or are there other factors there too?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things for sure. I mean, we have a good, strong public service here in British Columbia. You've got healthcare workers and direct government workers. You have teachers and educators and folks who work in the school systems. But of course, also there is a good, strong public sector union voice in this province. We've got folks in steelworkers and UFCW, food and commercial workers, hotel industry, as well as the building trades, which are continuing to do really good, strong organizing here, despite hard times and despite regressive legislation that used to exist in BC that made it hard for people to join unions. There were still people really focused on making unions accessible to workers in all industries.
What was it that made you an activist, Suzanne? What attracted you to? I mean, lots of people work in unionized workplaces and don't get involved. You got very involved. How come?
I did right away. As a young person in high school, I was a UFCW 1518 member, working at the Royal Canadian Superstore. That was the first time I, it was the first union job I'd ever had. And it's only the second job I had, and I got to know a little bit about my union. But then in Prince George, I started working for what was the Ministry of Social Services at the time. I was a financial assistance worker, and I walked into the job, and the shop steward on my site and I managed to run into each other on a picket line. I grew up knowing that picket lines were important, that we needed to support workers when they're on picket line. And dating myself a little bit, the projectionists were on strike in the late
Mhm.
90s. And I just saw that there was a sign in my work site that said, "Hey, we're going to support these folks on the line." And so I showed up, and that was kind of the end of it. She was just like, "Come on, I've got a job for you." Brought me in, and I jumped right in with both feet because I grew up knowing how important unions were to my family, to the life that I grew up living. My dad was an IWA member working in a mill, and my mom was an admin worker working for Unite Here. Local 40, which was Local 40 at the time. And so I just grew up knowing how important unions were to the life I lived, to the type of home I was able to live in growing up, and it just was the right thing to do. And then, of course, I, got to see the benefits of being a union activist and get to know and learn about other unions and access to, making change for working people in the province.
Well, very few
Yeah.
people actually get to be an officer, never mind the president of the BC Federation of Labor. You've now been reelected to your second term. Our listeners probably don't have much of an idea about what that job entails. What's your favorite part of it? What's it like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a complicated job to try and explain to people for sure. But it is a job, I take quite seriously. I get up every day and I think to myself, what am I going to do today to make sure that, the Federation, myself as a leader in the labor movement is making a difference in working people's lives. And, we've got a lot of people who are not in unions yet. There's a lot of work to do there, but there are also folks who are in unions, who need the Federation of Labor to stand strong for them and make sure that, the rights that they've fought really hard for in their collective agreements are upheld, and that we should they go on strike, that there's a strong labor force behind them. So there's lots of good things. Some of my favorite things, of course, are when we make a difference. We've seen some big wins in the labor movement. Paid sick leave comes to mind. I mean, it was a bit of a all the stars aligned in a really horrific time in the country and in the world, quite honestly. As we were able to make a difference with government to be able to say, we've been fighting for paid sick leave for a lot of time, as you know, Geoff, at the Federation, for workers to have this. And, we were able to make that difference for people. And so another one big turnaround was minimum wage, making sure that, the people aren't being left behind who are working in minimum wage. And now it's tied to inflation. Those are big, huge improvements that because of the labor movement, because of activists all over our province fighting hard and making a public case for the things that are important, we were able to win some really big things. And then I have to say, the other thing is when I go to job sites and get to meet with workers, I toured around last year a little bit. I went and met with workers up in Kitimat, LNG. I went and met with workers up in Site C, and met with them on the ground and talked about the work they're doing in our province. And, meeting workers where they're at and talking about their jobs and how important their jobs are to them and how important it is to be in a union, that really grounds me in the work that I do as a president. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the tariffs are front of mind for everyone here in BC and Canada this week.
Mm-hmm.
And the Premier has been talking about expediting projects to diversify BC's trade and reduce our reliance on the U.S. Do you see that as an opportunity for building the unionized workforce on resource projects in British Columbia?
Yeah, I'm really appreciative of the steps that the Premier has taken and the tone that he's taken on this. And the smart response, right? The labor movement has been invited to the table. There are four of us who are sitting at the task
Mhm.
force, on behalf of the labor movement.
And who are the others?
And it's myself, Scott Lenny from the United
Mm,
Steelworkers, Al Phillips from the Building Trades, and Gavin McGarrigle from Unifor.
okay.
So the four of us are sitting there, and the Premier's made it very clear that protecting workers and defending jobs is a priority to this government, and that alone is setting the right tone for me. And as we look at different ways of diversifying our province and making sure that working people here are not harmed by the unreliability and the unpredictability of what might happen out of the president's office in the United States. I do see it as an opportunity for good jobs. We know that union jobs are good jobs. They support communities and families all over the province. And there is no better way out of poverty and good paying jobs than joining a union. So this is a real opportunity for the union movement, especially in the private sector.
What's the biggest fear you have right now that you're hearing actually from affiliates about the impact of tariffs? I mean, we have a
Yeah.
30-day reprieve. What's the biggest anxiety?
The biggest anxiety is that people lose their jobs, that industry shuts down. We're already hearing some rumblings of, some mills may be shutting down for weeks. So, assessments can be made about where things are at. And that's my biggest fear, is that people lose their jobs, right? People lose their ability to be able to pay their bills, feed their families, and participate in the economy. And so, we know that workers are anxious, and we know that people are nervous about that. We already worried about a bit of an economic downturn as it was, and this makes things feel really unstable for people. And so the government and the labor movement have a role in trying to figure out ways to stabilize that and give people some level of certainty and security as we face this together. It's going to be a tough time.
Are you expecting the government to provide direct assistance to companies that face disruption or to workers? I mean, this would be a tough one, I think, because you don't want to provide support to a company and then learn that it's shifted production to the United States anyway as a hedge. I mean, there's a lot of issues involved here.
Yeah, there are a lot of issues, and that is one of the things that we have said repeatedly as we've been talking about this, and we're hearing from the unions and the BC Federation of Labor, is that as we saw in COVID times, and COVID was a bit different, obviously, than what we're dealing with right now. But resources were given to companies, and there wasn't necessarily that same tie into making sure that those commitments were tied to workers in British Columbia. And so that is one of the things that we are making clear to the government, that any efforts that are made, that there needs to be efforts made, and we support that. And we're happy to be sitting at the table, trying to move this together with business folks and community folks from all over the province that are sitting on the task force. But that any investment into business in British Columbia has to have ties to workers, has to have ties to keeping people working, so that because we know that if industry leaves province, leaves the country, it's very hard to bring it back. So
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
feel
for
like
sure.
in times like this, and perhaps we had one not that long ago with COVID,
mhm.
where there's a crisis, that you're able to move issues faster with business or with government or both in a situation like this? Like, is this a time where the wheels can get greased here and you can get some stuff done?
Yeah, it is definitely a time where we can sort of sit down and put our differences aside, and try and find things that we have commonalities on and push those things together. We've already had some good conversations with people at the table, and looking forward to having more about how we can move together and create some space for government to be able to do what it needs to do in this time, and to do it effectively and quickly. Because if we wait too long, it really creates a lot of uncertainty for folks, and we don't want that for working people.
Oh, it's sort of, if you step back a bit, it feels like workers are having a bit of a moment politically, especially blue collar, hard hat wearing workers, because conservative politicians like Donald Trump and Boris Johnson in the UK and Doug Ford here and John Rustad, Pierre Poilievre, are all saying they're for the working class, even. They use the term working class.
Mhm.
Uh, how do you read that? What's going to be the impact on the BC Federation of Labor and its approach to politics?
Yeah, and we have been looking at this even before the tariff threat came, right? About how we talk to our members, how we meet the needs of membership. But the reality is that workers are the economy. There is no economy without working people. And so, yes, this is shining a light in this moment on how important workers are, how important unions are, that we are a critical piece of the economy, and that no decision should be made about the economy without working people at the table and the unions that represent them. So we really are, sort of shining a light right now all over the country. With Canadian Labour Congress is also doing a lot of really good work on this, and making sure that people understand, what's at stake, who's at the table for them, who's really standing up for them. So it is a moment for us to be able to communicate and build stronger relationships with the membership of the unions that are affiliated to the federation.
But do you feel there's an element of um, center and center left political organizations losing the plot a bit when it comes to working people and working families? Is there ground that has to be made up there? What's your read on that?
I, yeah, I mean, politics is very divisive, that, and so we've had lots of
Oh no, look at
conversations,
Mike and I.
and
We're best of friends.
I know, and I enjoyed the banter for sure. And we do have to have, definitely have to have relationships with folks on all sides of the political spectrum and all of that. But proof is always in the outcome, right? And so for us in the labor movement here in British Columbia, we know that we have a stronger voice with a political party who has working people at the table, who's not afraid to bring us into the room. We spent a lot of years being shut out of government. I was like you said, I was a BC government worker for many years, and a political activist in Prince George, and we didn't have access, and we weren't invited into the room. And so, for us being able to be in the room and be able to communicate that to union workers, but also all workers in the province, that working people have a voice at the table, and that we're pushing government to make sure working people are at the front and center of the decisions that they're making. We do have a moment here as labor movement to strengthen our relationship and strengthen the tie that workers have back to the labor movement and the long history that the labor movement's had being the voice for working people in our province.
Mhm.
Um, during the past year, we've seen an increase in strikes nationally.
Mm.
We've had a difficult longshore strike here. There's been a rail strike. Postal workers are out too. Um, what, in your opinion, what do you think's been driving that kind of action? I mean, is it growing frustration over affordability? Is it are there other issues at play that, from a macro kind of perspective, that are driving conflict, or are there other things happening at the table?
The rank and file mood is the same as everyone else's in the province. People are worried. These are really uncertain times, and workers are looking for security wherever they can find it and however they can find it. So, I've been at the bargaining table a few times over the years, and nobody goes into the bargaining. It goes into bargaining looking for a stripe. It's a tool in the toolbox that workers have to be able to show their strength and show their solidarity and their collectivity with one another. And it's the last step that workers take, along the path to be able to try and get the deal that they're looking for, to get a fair deal. So, it's as simple as, we go to the bargaining table. There's two sides of the bargaining table. There's the
Mm.
employer side, there's the worker side, and there is, often a path. We don't actually see a lot of strikes in a ton of different work sites. We have, like I said, 500,000 unionized workers. So yes, big strikes, big, political strikes too, in the country. But people are worried, right, about being able to keep jobs, feed their families, and the uncertainty is very scary for people, which means they're willing to go out on a picket line and fight hard for the collective agreement that they feel they deserve. And that's a right that we have here in Canada.
So just to follow that up, I mean, as it relates to the supply chain,
Hmm.
and there's been a lot of negative attention on the Port of Vancouver and the reliability of shipping through the port, um, because of labor stoppages. What's the response of labor to how to prevent that in the future? Or some interests will say government should intervene faster. Government should crack down on it before it gets out of control, before it leads to a black mark on our reputation as a reliable port of entry. Where do you come from on that?
I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum on
Yeah.
that. Probably no surprise
Well, I
to
assume
you.
that you
That
probably support a smooth supply chain yourself, I'm thinking.
Sure,
So,
yeah, sure. But the first thing that always comes out of my mouth when I hear, that government should intervene, that it should happen
mm,
faster. The reality is the best deal that happens for both sides in any
mm,
deal, whether we're talking about a port strike or a library strike or post-secondary education strike, is at the table with the parties who it impacts the most,
mm,
because a collective agreement is just that. It is an agreement between both parties.
mm,
It's the rules of engagement that you have, and it levels the
mm,
playing field for everybody. It just lays out what the employer's rules are, what the employees' rules are. And so, as people are negotiating their collective agreements, having someone like the government intervene in that is not actually helpful. In fact, it causes more harm than good, as we see in many workplaces, like the rail strike, like the port strike. Those were very contentious issues, and you saw some pretty heated discussion and conversation happening, in the media and on the picket lines as well. And people still have pretty strong feelings about the government intervening in that, and that has its impact also.
Guess, let's talk more about copper theft. It deserves more attention, and this week we're going to get into the how. Because you might be wondering, how does all this copper go missing? And spoiler alert, it's nothing elaborate, but it is quite harmful. Because infrastructure upgrades, super common necessary things like road construction, will often leave copper wiring exposed or just lightly covered. During road upgrade projects, thieves will arrive at night in pickup trucks, attach the wire on site, and just start driving away. It results in an average loss of 800 meters of wire at a time. These criminals often pose as construction workers, making their activities less suspicious to passersby. In the Lower Mainland, aerial theft is more common. A person will climb a telecom pole and cut down the wires and just carry them away. A less visible, but even more dangerous method of theft is to crawl under manhole covers and cut away cables. And this can happen anywhere. The three most frequently impacted communities in BC, those are Mission, Abbotsford, and Surrey. Copper theft isn't a rural or an urban problem, it's a growing problem BC-wide. BC has experienced a 94% increase in the number of copper thefts and vandalism since 2023. During this time, customer impact is up by 500%, leading to 29 million customer minutes of outage and degradation each year. We'll talk more about that next week.
What's your read? I know you can't speak for the public sector unions who are each going to do their own bargaining with the provincial
Hmm.
government, but
Hmm.
that's at least as big a deal as the supply chain in terms of uh, the future of the budget, compensation for workers in the public service, protection of services, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
How does it look to you from the perspective of the Fed at the moment? How does it appear to be unfolding, and what would you say to people to look forward to as far as this round of bargaining goes? I know you're trying to save you from trying to speak for a union, but still, it's a huge
Yeah.
elephant in the room.
For sure. And I obviously can't speak for any one union. We bring folks together in the Federation of Labor and, try and coordinate as much as we can and keep people up to date and support and build solidarity amongst one another. That's our role as the Federation. Um, but these are tough times, right? Affordability is forefront on everyone's mind right now. The cost of living everywhere in British Columbia is very difficult. Folks know what the current state of the budget is and the deficit and people are nervous, right? And so, and rightfully so. But what I will say, when we're looking at the budget and we're contemplating sort of how things are, especially in this uncertain time, the tariff conversation just adds a whole new dynamic to everything. But at the end of the day, when times are tough, when the economy's struggling, when workers are struggling, when working people and their families are struggling, is not the time for government to tighten their belt. It's time for trying to figure out solutions, how to support workers, how to make sure we can keep people working in this province and provide the services that people rely on so critically. Living in Prince George and working in the public sector for so many years, people relied on the services that we offer to them every day. And we need to make sure that those services continue, whether it's healthcare, education, uh, you know, community social services. There are big bargaining tables, heading into bargaining. And we're just going to make sure that we, do the best that we can to make sure that should the workers decide to use the tool in their toolbox about going on a picket line, that we will support them and that the other unions will stand in solidarity with them.
Mhm. But looking
There's
at
been,
the
go ahead, Geoff.
Federation has always been overwhelmingly in support of election time of the NDP option.
Mhm.
And David Eby had as he put it, a near-death experience last fall with the very tight outcome we saw there. But looking back to 2017, the three mandates the NDP has won up to this point, and then looking forward, how is the Labour leadership assessing how it's done on the policy front, and what are the big changes, if any, that you'd like to see David Eby focus on in the months and years ahead?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to start with looking back. We made some historic advancements, as you know, Geoff, both with with John and with David. I mentioned a few already. We talked about paid sick leave and the increases to the minimum wage. There were also huge reforms in the workers' compensation system here, the WCB. There's big changes there. There's more to do. There's always going to be more to do at making improvements in these things, but we saw things with one-step certification, we call card check in the labor movement, making it, easier and more accessible for workers to join unions. There was laws around preventing child labor, skilled trade certification, the end of healthcare premiums, stronger employment standards, and more, right? Like this is just kind of the list, that we pull together when we're talking about the big wins that working people got, under an NDP government. But of course, we don't get everything we want, and we have to, strategize and figure out how and what and when we're going to push for things. And, as we look forward, as we look to, what are going to be real priorities for workers in this province and for unions in this province, there's a big, a long shopping list, as you can imagine. But we do have some things in the queue. There's some big issues going on at the labor board, as well as the employment standards, and labor code. And so there's some big pushes there. We're looking at, things like, uh, beefing up the labor board and making sure that workers have access to justice in a timely fashion. And we're also
It sounds like the Labour answer to the business call to speed up permitting.
yeah, indeed. But I mean, we're hearing cases from workers and their unions about things taking a really long time. And when we're talking about things like, whether it's employment standards or at the labor board, if things take time, it's the, same as in the court system, right? Justice delayed is justice denied. And so, as cliche as that may sound, it's a reality for workers. If you've not been paid the overtime that you're due, and you've got a case that goes to the board and it doesn't get heard for 6 months or 12 months, that's a really long time for a worker to wait for a paycheck that they need to feed their families and pay their bills. But we are looking at improvements to the labor code. We're also looking at, and this is one of the things that we've been talking about for a while now, is sort of a reimagining of the employment standards branch and how they deliver services. And so, instead of being reactionary and just dealing with complaints as they come, having something that's a bit more like the WCB model, like WorkSafe BC's model, where there's prevention, there's education, as well as dealing with employment standards complaints as they come in. So that's one of the other things. And there's a bunch of things in the queue. We just met last week, as you said, with the ranking officers, talking about what priorities are for the labor movement, and the list is long, and we're trying to narrow those things down so we can figure out what we want to push on, to make sure that we are making sure workers are at the front of the decisions that government makes.
Well, to Mike's point, if you can't get a mediator for 5 months, a dispute that might be solvable in a short term turns
Yeah.
unsolvable or much more difficult if there's a long delay before you get to mediation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
the
for
costs
sure.
are
And
real.
the one thing I did forget about, that is a priority, as we brought folks together over the last year and had some really good conversations about the labor code and how, trying to make unions more accessible to more workers, is sectoral bargaining, right? We've got a lot of workers who work in certain sectors, and each one site, I'll use Starbucks for an example, each one site has to bargain a new collective agreement for a small grouping of workers, but the job is the same. It doesn't matter where you are in the province. And so, having conversations about how we can make sure that sectoral bargaining, so that workers who wouldn't traditionally have been able to join unions in the past are able to do that, and able to actually see a first collective agreement and then build on that, is
Mhm.
very, very important to labor movement as well.
The labor critic for the Conservatives in BC is a Prince George guy, Kyle Giddens. What
Mhm.
kind of dialogue have you had with John Rustad and Kyle Giddens and the rest of the Conservatives so far? Are you getting a read on where they're at on these issues?
Yeah, I'll be honest, we haven't had those dialogues yet. We are, in the process of getting to know all of the new
Mhm.
cabinet ministers and the new MLAs that have been elected for government. And then we will delve into our lobbying efforts, which of course will,
Mhm.
we lobby all of the parties about our issues, because it's important that folks know what the labor movement is, what our priorities are, and what working people want to see out of the government. So we will delve into those relationships, but we are focused right now on making sure that we have good relations with the government and the cabinet ministers.
Mhm. Don't forget about those two Greens.
Oh
They've
yeah.
Never do.
they they got a little bit of influence these days.
They
You've
do.
talked you've talked about a bunch of issues on the ground, but
Mm.
I'd like to step back a bit and look at the larger political context or financial context, really, of how the labor movement works in the political field. Because really, this last election was the first full-on post-campaign finance reform election, where neither,
Hmm.
the COVID one was kind of a peculiar case. It was under those rules, but now we've had an election outside the pandemic where labor and corporate donations are prohibited and carefully regulated, and so the visibility of the Federation of Labor really went down. Um, I think it's personally a healthy development that the big money's out of politics, but how is it changing how labor does politics? And what was your takeaway after that last election? Did you feel you had a lot to learn, or that it worked pretty well? What was going on that the public couldn't see?
Yeah, I mean, the last election was remarkable for a few reasons. One was definitely the result, incredibly close. We know that voters are clearly frustrated, and there is change happening everywhere. We're seeing it all over the world. That elections are often change elections, and so that folks want politicians who are on their side. They want to feel like they're on their side. And, we know that the Conservatives in the provincial election definitely captured some energy and built some momentum on that. But in the same, voters did not bring in the Conservative project of dismantling government and making leaner, meaner society, from my perspective. And the message that we heard on the doorstep was very clearly, the government needs to do more for working people, that people need to be able to feel the difference quicker and faster and more impactful in their homes and in their everyday lives. And, they need to be able to tangibly feel the difference that government's having on their lives. And of course, that's what we're pushing the government to do on all fronts. And so, when we're talking about the election and how we do elections, right, with big money out of politics, we had to really, go back to kind of old school organizing methods, right, and doing that engagement on the door, doing face to face and one-on-one contact, which of course is the most important thing that any political party should be doing during an election, but not just during elections. And I think that's probably one of the big things, was our relationships with our unions that are affiliated to the Federation and the workers that belong to those unions cannot be transactional, right? We cannot just go to workers during election time and say, hey, go vote for these people because we said so and we're part of the labor movement and you should just trust us. That we need to be able to show repeatedly over the whole entire term of government that we're there, that we have their backs, that we're fighting for them, and that we're talking about issues that matter to them, and to be able to build trust and build relationships. We know, when people are making political decisions, they want to make political decisions with people who they trust to make, to have those conversations with. And so that really is, I mean, we saw people shift the dial in this election from, in the past, we used to be able to book people off and all of that, but people were embracing the volunteerism of campaigns again in a way that we actually haven't seen. We saw, I mean, gosh, we were out door knocking every night and had workers on the door every night and in ridings all over the province from the labor movement. And we saw people show up in really big numbers in ways that we hadn't seen in a lot of elections. So it was actually made me hopeful, made me inspired to see working people, hospital employees, union workers wearing their shirts, or SEIU members out there wearing their shirts, knocking about on doors and talking about why the election was important to them as workers, in the healthcare sector, in the, in private sector, whatever sector they're coming from. We saw workers on the door talking about why elections matter, why politics matter.
So you're
and
building
not just in that high level, right?
So it's building turnout and engagement, not
Yeah.
saying go vote for this guy.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Which is good organizing, right? That's good internal and external organizing, whether you're trying to get people to join your union or whether you're trying to get people to understand why this is so important to them and how it impacts their families.
Mhm.
You follow in the footsteps of BC Federation of Labor leaders who preceded you, who were household names, many of them. Are there any that you draw inspiration from the past or present too, labor leaders today? Like who are some that you think, boy, I get strength from those people?
Honestly, I get strength from all of them. I was fortunate enough just last week actually to be having dinner with Jim Sinclair, Irene Lanzinger, and Laird Cronk, all past presidents in order at the Federation of Labor, and they all had unique contributions to the labor movement in very different times. And so, I lean into them a lot. I will phone them. I'll go for lunch with them, and talk about the struggles we're having in this moment in time. And I take their sage advice and their wisdom, and I'm also open to hear from them about things they think we should be doing or the sort of constructive criticism. I really lean into those relationships because they've been here through different times than we're in now, but also difficult times. So there are of course amazing union leaders all over this province. In the rank and file, on the ground shop floor of many work sites. And those folks inspire me too. Seeing, new certifications. I was just in a room full of union leaders last night, and a young person who organized their work site was telling their story. I take a lot of inspiration from folks like that because that's really what drives the movement is the rank and file folks on the ground, on the shop floor, making a difference.
Well, before we let you go, can you give us an insight into what the ranking officers, which for those who aren't familiar, these are sort of the top officers of all the Fed affiliates. What is job one in their mind for the coming 12 months? What's the key thing they would like to be able to put a check mark next to at this time next year? Any idea?
I mean, there's never just one thing. That's always the challenge about, trying to prioritize what's important to all of the affiliates. Of course, public sector bargaining is like on the top of everyone's mind because it impacts all of us. But like I mentioned before, making the labor board more substantial, right? Making sure that it is funded properly, right? That's one of the biggest problems, right? It's woefully underfunded and there are not enough people to do the work that happens, and making sure that workers have access to the systems that are supposed to be able to help navigate joining unions and dealing with their grievances and all of that. That's a big priority for folks. And then WCB, right? There's more work to do at WCB. There's always more work at trying to make it more worker centered, and keeping workers' voices at the front of that table. We've been pushing really hard for the last couple of years on psychological injury and the presumptive coverage for WCB. I won't get into sort of the nuts and bolts of that, but we've been pushing government really hard, and we've seen some growth in the workers that are covered by presumptive coverage for psychological injury, which means it's just if they're injured at work, same as a broken arm. If you get a psychological injury at work, that you're not having to go the extra mile to prove that. And so we think that all workers should be covered by that, because psychological injury should be treated the same as physical injury. So that's also one of our priorities. So right now we're really just delving into figuring out a strategy around what priorities we push forward and when, because some of it is, about is the strategy of timing, and that's going to be our biggest struggle in keeping everybody moving forward. That's what the Federation does.
Well, Trump sucks the air out of the room. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, of course. And priority number one is, continuing to support the government on the issues around the uncertainty of dealing with our counterparts in the United States and keeping people working, right? At the end of the day, we need to keep people working in this province for all the reasons that should be obvious to folks. But the best economic plan is people working. And we know that here in British Columbia. And so we're going to keep pushing on that one for sure.
Okay, well, Sister Suzanne, thanks for stopping by Hotel Pacifico today. As you can see, we are a very labor peaceful place to spend time with. No picket lines here.
No days lost to job action here. No.
Yeah. We appreciate. We'll hope our producer doesn't come on screen here to plead her case. But
I'll be signing union cards before the day's out.
Whoa! Hold on a second here. But thanks for coming by. I enjoyed the conversation, and we hope you'll come visit us again sometime.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to it.
Hi, hotel guests. When I was a kid, I grew up in Maple Ridge, right on the border of Pitt Meadows, and we were surrounded by farmland. In fact, we had a small family barn, and I can still remember the chickens clucking. I could hear the coyotes in the distance, and I spent more than a few hours shoveling out stalls, although my sisters might argue that point. But have you ever thought about what goes into a farm, the hardworking farmers, the food it provides, the animals that live there? Or did you even consider that farms are helping to provide energy and address climate change? Over the past few weeks, we've been highlighting the solutions that exist in the energy transition. We've spoken about electricity, natural gas, the role of hybrid energy systems. But what about other low-carbon energy options like renewable natural gas? Renewable natural gas is a low-carbon energy that can help the province advance its climate action goals while providing an option for customers to help reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions. Derived from organic sources, renewable natural gas is a low-carbon direct substitute for conventional natural gas. Fortis BC works with farms, landfills, wastewater treatment facilities, as well as local and Indigenous communities across the province and elsewhere to capture and purify this methane, which would otherwise escape into the atmosphere. Significant progress has been made in increasing the supply of low-carbon energy, which allows Fortis BC to provide customers with the energy they need while using existing infrastructure and supporting overall emissions reductions. If you are a gas customer interested in renewable gas, visit fortisbc.com/RNG. Fortis BC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
This me and old Geoff here. Old Mike and old
Yeah.
Geoff. Just, boy, we're really missing Kate today. We'll do our best. We'll do our best, Geoff.
I think
Courage,
so.
courage. Well, guess what? Last week, we all got together in person at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade's Outlook Forum last Thursday, where your trio of Hotel Pacifico co-hosts entertained the assorted throng, those that had stuck around to the very last minutes of the session. There were a few hundred of them, I would think. Hey, Geoff?
Yeah,
And no
exactly.
one threw any buns at us or anything like that. We gave them our 2 cents on what was going to happen. But that day, there was discussion at the forum that guarded optimism that the tariffs wouldn't be instituted. And then 24 hours later, it's like, the tariffs will be instituted. And then yesterday, the tariffs will not be instituted, at least for 30 days. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride, Geoff.
Well, it has been because, and I don't think it's over because we got a 30-day reprieve. The Prime Minister did after 2 phone calls that was similar to what Mexico got in return for what I think was pretty close to what he had said about a month ago we would do on the border. But I think we're going to take a lot of hits simply from people being confused and uncertain about what's going on. I think if I was a business person and I had a lot of business in the United States, I would be considering very carefully whether I would double down on my investments in the States because that seems like the safest harbor right now. So it'll be a very tricky time, I think, from a whole number of standpoints.
Well, there's a lot of BC forest companies that have significant operations in the U.S. As a hedge.
That's been their strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
they're probably thinking that was a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, did you catch David Eby on Fox News on the weekend?
No, I did not.
Yeah, he spent about 5 minutes on Fox News pleading the case for British Columbia, and objectively, I thought he did a pretty good job. Actually, he's credit to the Premier's office that we've seen a lot of the Premier in the last few days. Like people may quibble with the policy prescriptions or not, but they can't quibble with the fact that he's been very available to the media.
Well, I heard him on CBC at length on the morning show, and I felt he was the most comfortable place I've heard him in a long time. I think he did a very good job. Stephen Quinn, who's the host there, can be difficult with guests sometimes. He had Stephen well in hand, but he seemed comfortable. He was delivering good points. He was totally on top of the file, which he usually is. And I think we saw that performance validated by the Research Co poll that came out a couple of days ago, which ranked how various provincial voter bases were evaluating their premier's performance. And Eby did the best of any province tested by Mario Conseco. I can't remember the exact number. And John Rustad had the lowest approval of an opposition leader in that poll. So I'm sure you could quibble with the methodology, but I don't think it's been a good period for Eby despite the difficult time. And I think it's been a bad period for Rustad. I don't think he was really off to a good start until he finally got out a 10-point plan, which I think was about 24 hours ago.
Well, I mean, opposition leaders often get left at the station when a crisis takes hold, and most of the focus is usually on the government and the leaders in government. So David Eby's come up with a bit of a plan. One of them is expediting 10 projects, and by the time this episode drops, we'll probably know what those 10 are. And
I don't know. I've asked directly and not been able to find out.
I think it's coming out this afternoon.
Oh, is it? Okay.
And he's left the door open to more than 10 down the road. And what does he mean by 10 projects? Because they're all private sector investments, presumably, unless there's BC Hydro stuff in there. But it's mainly streamlining, permitting, making things happen faster, finding where the pain points are, and trying to deal with them, I suppose. But I mean, I think it's a good signal to investors who are maybe one of those 10 projects that government's going to partner with them to get the show on the road. So you worry about government picking winners and losers and all that kind of stuff, that rhetoric from the past. But in this particular point in time, I think people are saying, yeah, let's not be slow. Let's be fast here.
Well, I think people will appreciate it, but it's not without risk because expediting in the eyes of the public may seem like a glacial pace in the eyes of the proponent. It'll be interesting to see what they are and how complex they are. You know, to my way of thinking, the more exposure there is to Indigenous consultation, for example, the harder it is to expedite some of these things. And the same goes to some extent for environmental approvals, although sometimes they're more amenable to just an outcome-based approach as opposed to a long procedural thing. But there's no question he's leaning into this, and I wouldn't be surprised if not now, then very soon they'll start trying to figure out how to speed up the delivery of public sector projects too, some of which are going to have a lot of positive impact here if they go faster. Things like the SkyTrain extension to UBC, for example, and there'll be other infrastructure projects like that. But to go back to Rustad for a sec, I thought at the event we were all at on Thursday, he blamed Eby to some extent for provoking the trade war. But when you listened closely to his prescriptions, which were not yet in the 10-point plan, they weren't that different from what Brenda Bailey and Ravi Kahlon and the Premier himself have been saying in terms of expediting projects, a lot of openness to dealing with, trying to manage the provincial finances better, looking at that old standby interprovincial trade barriers as a miracle cure, which I'm fine with if it can happen. I'm just not sure.
You're more recently in government than I was. What would be an example of some intractable interprovincial trade issue that just provinces just aren't resolving?
Well, I thought Laura Jones made some important points on our podcast last time too, but the famous one, she touched on the television screen size thing, which is different in each province, but that's like a fairly small bore thing. The access to liquor and wine markets and beer markets is a bigger deal. But there are a lot of very difficult ones, like the credentials for example, health personnel. So I could be approved to work in one province, but not in another. Is there a way, and Laura Jones was saying there might be, to say, we're going to allow that, we're going to accept so-and-so's credentials and that kind of thing. What I think has been difficult along the way, workers' compensation is another one. But as Rachel Notley pointed out in a recent interview I saw, there are not people around in provinces dreaming up rules because they like rules. Usually, these rules are protections developed at the request of provincial stakeholders. And so premiers are very hard-pressed to turn to their own team and say, we're finally going to let this barrier down, and Alberta, fill in the blank, is going to come in here unfettered. They will not get, on a Christmas card list of some groups doing that. So I'm not sure who grabs this thorny problem and takes it forward. It can't be the Prime Minister, particularly this one, who's just about to head for the exit. I guess some provinces could do it unilaterally, but, on the times I was watching, it was, the former Premier of Manitoba furious about this or that specific thing, and I think after months of effort they solved it. So it's not as easy as it looks. I mean, do we even have a single business license now for every municipality in Metro? I'm not sure. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we just had the interview with Suzanne Skidmore, and she was bringing up issues about how long it takes to get decisions, I think, or mediators appointed.
Yeah.
And, whether it's, as you made the point, whether it's streamlining permitting or just making the machinery of government move faster, easier said than done. Sometimes it takes resources. Sometimes it just takes, maybe more managerial focus to unstick some problems that have been there a long time. But I don't know.
Do you want to move to the budget a bit? Because I think this is a good example.
Sure.
Well, what does Finance Minister Brenda Bailey say to the Labour Minister, who's Jennifer Whiteside, who will come forward, even though the government is pressing back against anybody who asks for more money? If suppose Whiteside comes forward and says, I need X number of dollars, and the total budget of the Labour Board is $11 million, it'd be a tiny sum, as to fund the changes I think will produce the following outcomes. Do you give them that money on the assumption that you'll find savings down the road, or even that you'll avert some labour disputes? I think one of the big problems confronting the government right now is that it has to drive innovation within the public service to find actual savings. And so when Brenda Bailey is pointing to the mandate letter emphasis on efficiency, it's really a light shining back on the leadership of the public service, who can be very innovative and very capable. They stood up a vaccine program in the blink of an eye during the pandemic, even substituted for federal officials at the border when we were trying to deal with people coming across who may not have been properly vaccinated, that kind of stuff. There's tremendous capacity there, but to encourage people to do that in real time is tricky. It's one of the big challenges in the budget, I think, for Brenda Bailey. And this is a good example of it. Do you give somebody some more money on the assumption that it'll be more efficient, and then find out later that they took the money and it's not more efficient? It's
Well,
not much
usually
fun.
what drives efficiency is when you give them less money,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you got to do more with less. So
Yeah,
it's two ways to look at it. So with regard to, well, I mean, planning for the budget in the context of the tariff threat is going to be fascinating. That's March 4th, I think. Or is March 4th,
that's
I
right.
think, is the
Yeah,
budget.
yeah.
So that you and I will be checking that out in lockup, we hope.
Hmm.
But in the meantime, Commander Kalon has taken over the cabinet committee leadership for the tariff response, and we'll see what is manifests out of that. That gives Ravi kind of a new platform to Ravi be Ravi, go out and make some noise in the economy and harness the other cabinet ministers behind him, who are mainly on that cabinet committee membership are mainly economic ministers.
Yeah.
I didn't see Mike Farnworth on there, incidentally, but I did see pretty much everybody else who's a dirt minister or the jobs minister, finance minister, and so
Hmm.
forth. Environment minister was on there. What do you expect out of Ravi? What do you think he's going to
Well,
generate out of all that?
he's turning out to be the person I think the premier turns to when there's tough business to do. So a tough business in the housing side meant reading the Riot Act to municipalities that fail to meet their targets. And you pointed out to me earlier that one of the targets of his recent ire was Souk, which did not meet its housing targets. So they have 30 days to bring their bylaw into compliance. The mayor of Souk is a very committed New Democrat running in the
Mm.
federal election. Some of the others are I think it was North Vancouver District was another one. So he's out there pushing on that, but also been given now this responsibility to coordinate a lot of very difficult issues that are going to come up in terms of the tariff response. And I think that the creation of this cabinet committee is a smart idea because it provides a forum for the public service to bring stuff up to the cabinet level for review and discussion, and speeds it along, as opposed to following the usual approach. You can't keep doing it indefinitely, but it's a good move. So I call him Commander Kellogg because I imagine him in the war room with banks of television sets and flashing lights and stuff. But I doubt if there's that. Um, he also said he was going to wade in to review metro governance, which was a request that came from Brad West. So there's really not any gnarly file that Ravi hasn't got his teeth in right now. Tariffs, municipal governance, housing crisis. Busy guy.
Well, a lot can be done in the name of creating a more resilient economy and resilient public service in spite of this existential threat coming from the U.S. So now is the time to make some big moves. Of course, you always worry about how much you can bite off at one time, how much bandwidth you have to push all these forward.
So what was your read on Brenda Bailey's presentation to the Board of Trade?
Well, I thought it was an interesting contrast between Brenda Bailey and John Rustad because Brenda Bailey, I think, was clearly trying to demonstrate to the attendees at that event that she wanted to work with them. She had very more of a sunny, optimistic view of working with the business community. Whereas Rustad came in and was very, I think, on spoke with much more urgency. I think maybe if I can put it that way, he was much more pointed, much more political, and I don't mean that as a negative. I think he was just serving up some very specific things that he was making his case why the government's not doing the right things. Whereas I don't think Brenda Bailey was necessarily as very forceful about her message. And that's maybe a style thing, and there's often differences between men and women and how they message politically, generally speaking. But I think it's also that she's relatively new to that role and probably finding her feet as a communicator, as a senior. I mean, she was the jobs minister, but as a finance minister, it's another level. And I think as time goes on, especially when she sells the budget, she'll have to have a real, a specific sales pitch.
Yeah, I thought I agree with much of what you say. I think what was emerging as a latent message, not explicit in this one, was that the focus or priority will have to be supporting economic development and investment, and that's why we see the 10 projects. We saw Adrian before Christmas, Adrian Dix with the 9 wind farms, regulatory changes at the BC Utility Commission, things like that, which are intended to make the economy stronger and more resilient. But if that's part of the equation, the really difficult part that was put into the mandate letter was to demonstrate some kind of a pathway to balance at a time when there's a massive uncertainty hanging over the budget because of the Trump threat and tremendous pressures already built in for which there's no obvious revenue response. So pretty tough for Brenda Bailey to go out there and start rolling in any tax increases, and it's hard to foresee where she could actually be confident that there'll be resource rent increases and that kind of stuff, which would normally fund it. So very tough situation that she's wrestling with, I think.
Well, just to wrap up our discussion on the tariff issue, we have a clipping of the week. So in the Calgary Herald this week, Don Braid, who you can probably regard him as the Von Palmer of Alberta, he's written for the Calgary Herald for a long time, and generally someone who can be quite critical of Premier Danielle Smith too. He noted the important role she played in dealing across the border with the Trump administration. Much of her points were echoed in Justin Trudeau's response to effect a 30-day pause in the tariffs. And to quote Braid, he says, even her critics should pause their other grievances and give her a hand. Danielle Smith played a serious role in that outcome that happened with the pause. And, I think what we're seeing is two very different styles of leadership between Danielle Smith and David Eby. Danielle Smith is like, let's go engage with the Americans, let's find out what's bugging them, and go do something about it. And she's flying Black Hawk helicopters along the border and echoing the Trump administration's concerns about the border security and so forth. Whereas David Eby is taking a bit of a different tack here, where he's saying we need to just fight this unreasonable approach by the U.S., who want to make us the 51st state, and diversify our economy and be strong so that even if these tariffs don't happen, we're never put in this position ever again. Now, I would say it's probably not a bad thing that we are seeing different styles among the premiers. We can, it's not a bad thing to have a diversity of approaches here. I don't think they're necessarily inconsistent with each other. But
Yeah,
what's your take?
I don't buy that. I mean,
No?
I think that Danielle Smith's solo trip down there with Kevin O'Leary, which was a farce and humiliating in a lot of ways. But I think that's been happening at the national and provincial level. I think that the Trudeau administration was too quick to push aside Mexico when these conversations began. And there's so many layers to this that it's very difficult to see what can happen. But the approach taken by Doug Ford, to a lesser degree by David Eby, and so on, are at least as valuable. Her goal, by the way, was no tariff on energy. She told Canada we can't use energy. And part of the reason why I think that there was a change on that front is that the full tariff on energy, which she was not able to push back, would have been an impact economically on a lot of U.S. consumers in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. So I think the Trump administration is just taking some time here. A second stat I saw that was very interesting was that 80% of the United States potash, which is crucial for crop production, comes from Saskatchewan. So there were senior Republicans in the Midwest going, whoa, better carve out potash. And so as these threats get made and people try to figure out how they're going to work out, new problems emerge. But the other thing I think is striking.
But do you think
Mike,
the 30-day pause would have happened, though? I mean, do you think there's no chance the tariffs would have been introduced? Or
I think there was a chance.
There's a case to be made that Danielle Smith maybe had a pretty big impact on the 30-day pause.
I guess so, but I don't buy that case at all.
Okay.
And we got Trump doing an April 1st review of everything. The whole treaty will be up for grabs. I think we're in for, he threw banks on the table. Why can't American banks compete here? What is it? We've added the money to the border, which will be very difficult to demonstrate any results for, I think. It could have further consequences. And next, we're going to have to deal with a new set of questions and concerns on 30 days hence, and then 30 days after that, 30 days after that. What we don't need, though, is Canadians, and I think Rustad fell into that camp, but blaming the victims of Trump's unilateral attacks on us and saying that somehow or other the behavior of Justin Trudeau or the behavior of David Eby brought all this on ourselves. Like whose side are you on? Pick a team. And some of the comments made by Aisha Esty, a very sharp conservative, spokesperson, president of the party, really disturbed me because she just directly blamed our feckless leaders for the situation we find ourselves in. Well, no, that's not the case. That's not right. And also very striking how harsh the direct political interference in our system is by critics in the States who wail away at Justin Trudeau and say he's a failed leader and things like that. There seems to be a subtext here that the personal dislike that Trump has for Trudeau is driving a lot of this and some of his assessment of how quickly, Canada would fold under the pressure.
Well, I think leaving aside a lot of the Trump craziness that's there, one particular area where the Americans can probably have a legitimate beef is Canada's contribution to defense spending. And the U.S. pays the freight as a percentage of their GDP, their enormous GDP. They pay a much higher percentage than we do of our GDP. We're one of the laggards in the Western world on defense spending. And I think one thing we have to come to terms with is what is Canada's responsibility when it comes to our shared defense. And
I agree.
so there's some substantial issues that have to be reckoned with.
And I would add crime into that.
Mm-hmm.
The strange thing is, but let me stay on sovereignty for a minute. It is embarrassing that we don't have sufficient ice-capable vessels to really know what's going on in the north. It's much smaller countries than us do that, but it's not necessary for the United States to spend as much as it does, i.e., more than almost anybody else in the world or all others in the world combined. Even Barack Obama pointed that out. So we don't need to take every lesson from the Americans on this. I think there's an increase that makes sense, but they are off the charts in terms of their military expenditures. On the crime side, they've been telling Canada for years we should get serious about money laundering and about a whole host of other things, which we now, I guess, are going to have to because we're going to be in some kind of joint strike task force with a fentanyl czar. I don't know who's going to put up their hand to solve the fentanyl problem, but it'll be interesting to see who the government picks. But what Trump has done, I think, is so interesting is he's using a clause that is for emergencies to justify economic measures. So these are national security issues. He defines the organized crime issue as a national security issue. We agree to list cartels as terror organizations like Hamas. I'm not quite sure what the implications of all that are. And so it's never clear to me whether we're having a national security crisis or an economic crisis. Actually, we're having both at the same time. And we're dancing pretty quickly to Trump's tune. That's what's happened so far.
Well, stay tuned for more drama on that front.
Meanwhile, in the Green Party.
Yeah, the Green Party. Meanwhile, over at the Green Party, last week we were coping with the breaking news of Sonia Furstenau's decision to step down as leader. And in the hustle and bustle of that breaking news while we were recording our pod, I think I assumed that the next leader would be one of the sitting MLAs, probably Jeremy Valeriot. But that is not the case. He will be the acting leader, and then will be he will yield to someone as yet unknown leadership candidate who will seek the leadership, or more than one candidate. So the Greens will have a new leader come the fall, and who will be a new influencer on the NDP government, given the agreement they have to support the NDP on confidence votes. So any bets on who the new Green leader might be? Is Gregor Robertson going to come out of retirement?
No, no, I don't think so. I have no idea. And I mean, I think that's the strange aspect of this is that, as listeners may remember, I was never convinced that the deal that was ultimately struck with the Green Party was necessary. People close to the Premier's office are very much in disagreement with me on that point. I feel it was really, really important. But we can see now with 2020 hindsight that the Green Party is not in a position to challenge the government in the legislature for at least a year because they're going to be going through a leadership process. And even at the end of that period, their third member or their leader won't be in the House. So I think that it's even more security for the New Democrats. I have to say, in fairness to people who are critical about me saying you don't need this deal, I was in the Glenn Clark Premier's office from 96 to 99, and we had a 3-seat majority, and it was a nightmare. And the current government's majority is smaller than that. Maintaining people in the House.
It was a nightmare for the opposition, too, I can tell you. 5 years in opposition during that time was no.
Yeah, I'm sure there were,
no
well, there were
picnic.
nightmares all around, but logistically, it's not as easy as it sounds to keep everybody in the House, given we already see Grace Lohr fighting cancer. So anyway, we'll see who it is. I have no idea.
I advise our young listeners to Google Corky Evans ham sandwich, and you will find out an episode of confidence being tested in the 1990s legislature, if you recall that.
Epic
Quote,
moments.
Corky
in
Evans,
Parliament.
quote, ham sandwich.
Okay. Yeah. Great moments in parliamentary democracy.
Great moments in parliamentary history. And then it bears mentioning, we have a new head of state in British Columbia as of last
seamless
week.
Seamless handover.
The Wendy Lizagar-Kokia has taken over the keys at Government House from Janet Austin. And Wendy and Sergio, well known as community leaders here in Vancouver. And I don't know if they have a dog, whether there be a dog replacing the Vice Regal McDuff, but we will stay tuned on that. But be nice to see Wendy discharging her duties, and hopefully, or maybe more excitedly, she might have to decide who's in government someday with some dramatic, dead heat at the polls next time. Wouldn't that be fun?
Mm-hmm. Well, she's been a great leader in work on autism and raising money for autism research.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Government House in Vancouver will be at the Century Plaza Hotel, I'm sure. So that will be a new Regal residence. Well, Geoff, I think you and I have done yeoman's work here. We probably deserve a drink in the minibar.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
I'm going to raise a glass to someone our listeners may not have heard of, Gavin McGarrigle. He was mentioned by Suzanne Skidmore earlier. He's Western Regional Head of Unifor, which is a pretty significant private sector union, conducting an organizing drive at the Amazon Fulfillment Center out in Tsawwassen. And as we saw in Quebec a couple of weeks ago, Amazon's not keen on union representation. And when one plant out of 7 was certified in Quebec, they shut down all 7 at a cost of 1,700 jobs. So we'll see what happens here. I understand from people who are in a position to know that what's happening in the organizing drive there is that Amazon, strangely may seem, is relentlessly hiring to keep Unifor below the level it would need to apply for certification. But it will be very interesting to see if certification is achieved there, because Unifor is very committed to this project. And if so, what the consequences are for the jobs out there and how the government would respond to Amazon pulling the pin. So anyway, best of luck, Gavin, to you and your organizing team. I'm raising a glass to you.
Great. Thanks, Geoff. I'm going to raise a glass to a former Hotel Pacifico guest, Susanna Pierce, who announced on LinkedIn today that she is leaving her role as head of country chair for Shell Canada. And I forget what it's called. They have a funny way of explaining these titles at Shell. President and country chair, sorry. Mm-hmm. And so in other words, she was an important person at Shell in Canada and other places too. But what's important about Susanna, among many things she's accomplished in her career, and certainly a huge participant in many community causes and charitable works, but in her capacity at Shell and LNG Canada, she was a huge drive behind making the LNG Canada project happen.
Very much so, yeah.
And not just that, but also laying the groundwork for basically new industry in British Columbia. And I think a lot of the First Nation partnerships, a lot of the underpinnings of what could be a growing sector in the future, we'll see bears Susanna's imprint. So I'm sure whatever she's planning to do next will be something to watch. She's got a lot of capabilities, and I wish her well.
Yeah, as do I.
So thank you to BC Federation of Labor President Suzanne Skidmore for dropping by Hotel Pacifico today, and thanks to our presenting sponsor TELUS and Fortis BC. See, Kate, we made it. Jeff and I could do it all by ourselves this week. But we sure hope you come back next week. And we'll see you next week. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.